We need more men is a sentiment that has been in the Israeli society for a while now, and it's a problem that has been the lack of manpower for the IDF is a problem that has been here even before October 7th, with October 7th after that horrific attack on Israeli citizens. There has been a lot of volunteers coming, which helped a lot the IDF numbers, but now it's coming back to the shortages that has been here for a while now. So we're gonna talk about the conscription that IDF has. We're gonna talk about if it should have it, and about all the different aspects, and as well as explain all the different exemptions and so on. Today, talking with me is James Valliant, a lawyer who I realized is only a couple separations from the one of the main people behind ending the draft in the US. So I think it's a very appropriate to have him on. Hey, James.
Hey, well, thank you. You do mention that I happen to have had a couple of wonderful conversations with the late Martin Anderson. He was an important policymaker who worked for both the Nixon and Reagan administrations. And in the wake of the Vietnam War, in which there was a draft, which was a very unpopular war, the draft became very, very unpopular. And in my country in the 1970s, it was the shift of the conservatives, people in the Republican Party, that made the difference. And Martin Anderson was advising those conservatives to get rid of the draft. He wrote a whole book criticizing the draft called Conscription. I recommend people to read. And he was instrumental in eliminating the draft, military conscription in the United States. And so we have an all volunteer service today. Ayn Rand was a huge critic of the draft. She said in A Mixed Economy, just about the worst. It looks like the recording stopped, but I should continue. She believed that the draft was a fundamental violation of individual rights, fundamentally the right to life itself. I don't know if we're still talking, but I'll just give Ayn Rand's quote in the meantime. Of all the statist violations of individual rights in a mixed economy, as opposed to a totalitarian, full-on socialist state, which they're on the verge, you can be on the verge of, but doing any worse than this in Ayn Rand's mind would take you out of the category of mixed economy. But she said, of all the violations of individual rights in a mixed economy, the military draft is the worst. It is an abrogation of rights. It negates man's fundamental right, the right to life, and establishes the fundamental principle of statism, that a man's life belongs to the state and the state may claim it by compelling him to sacrifice it in battle. Once that principle is accepted, the rest is only a matter of time. If the state may force a man to risk death or hideous maiming or crippling in a war declared at the state's discretion for a cause he may neither approve of nor even understand, if his consent is not required to send him to some unspeakable martyrdom, then, in principle, all rights are negated in that state, and its government is not merely is not man's protector any longer. What else is there left to protect? The state exists for one reason: to protect individual rights. And if they have the right to enslave people, in effect, that's what they're doing. If they have the right to force you to risk your life for a cause you may not even understand, they have violated your most basic right. It is an egregious rights violation of the worst kind. People will practically say that it is necessary to fight a war. What if, in the course of a war, there's not enough volunteers to fight the cause? Well, that tells you something about the cause. It's not understood, it's not popular, and often it justifies and allows bad wars. Wars that America fought, like Vietnam, that I just discussed, should never have been fought. Those thousands and thousands of young people who died in that war should never have died. And so just having an all-volunteer service discourages international interventions and wars, aggressive wars that shouldn't ever happen in the first place. When people believe in the cause, you don't have any lack of volunteers. Besides, volunteers are the ones who are motivated, the ones who believe in it. So military experts uniformly agree that an all-volunteer army is much more effective. If Israel is having trouble raising troops, raising enough soldiers for their cause right now, let me suggest it's because of the way they're fighting the war. Now, in the wake of October 7th, thousands and thousands of people were volunteering. They could call up reservists. Now, in Israel, they have a mandatory service. Everyone, male, female, who are Jews, are required to be in the IDF, to serve in the Israeli military in some form. Arabs are excluded, although there is a volunteer Arab force within the Israeli military. Religious extremists, certain religious groups, are exempted. But again, there is a unit in the Israeli army that is comprised of such people. Moreover, while they can call up reservists afterwards, there were thousands and thousands of people trying to volunteer. I hope that we can provide in the link the Jerusalem Post article, which showed that while the reservists allowed us to have sufficient numbers in the IDF, there were many, many, many other people trying to volunteer in many, many other ways. And so they were trying to find ways to use all of the thousands and thousands of volunteers. But Israel has not been fighting a proper war here. They could have destroyed Gaza from the air. They should never at any point risk a single Israeli soldier in order to spare Palestinian civilians. That is immoral. That is immoral. If Israel can do this without risking Israeli soldiers, they really must, they ought to do it that way. And if you're going to unnecessarily risk Israeli soldiers' lives, you can understand, or if the people are convinced that the Israeli policy is not going to bring a permanent end to this, you can understand doubts and questions. On the other hand, I don't think that Israel is lacking sufficient numbers here. They have a much greater technology, as I say, and could be much more effective with an all-volunteer force, it seems to me. But this is one of those areas in which we, as objectivists, have to be critical of the government of Israel. They are not a perfect country. They're infinitely better, obviously, than any of the surrounding countries, especially the Palestinian population. But I suspect that in the Muslim population surrounding Israel, there'd be no lack of volunteers to attack Israel. This is because if you believe in the cause, you don't have any lack for volunteers. And in the wake of October 7th, there were plenty of volunteers to fight for Israel. In contrast to that, you can look at, for example, the Russia-Ukraine war, wherein, in fact, there were a tremendous percentage of the Russian soldiers who invaded Ukraine simply disappeared, defected. There is stories of Russian defectors in Russia going to Ukraine to fight for Ukraine. When your cause is believed in by the population, you never have a problem raising sufficient soldiers to fight the war. When you don't, you will. And that means people don't believe in the war. And in any case, the only really effective force is an all-volunteer force. And more profoundly, it is a fundamental violation of the rights, I think we're getting Daniel back, a fundamental violation of the rights of its citizens. So in no case is it moral, in no case is it practical. And in any mixed economy, the military should be an all-volunteer force.
Hey, James, can you hear me okay?
Yes. Did any of that get recorded?
Yeah. So we are live. Everything was recorded. My internet died because of the storm. So,
oh dear.
So yeah, here I am with no electricity, no notes. So this is gonna be, and also I won't be able to read the chat. So I had apologies for these problems. But okay, so what have you covered so far? Have you covered how the IDF Who it conscripts and the exemptions. Have you covered that?
I have. Arabs are exempted, I covered, and religious groups are exempted as well. But I did note that there were volunteer services in which Arabs and these religious groups could, in fact, volunteer, and they exist. In other
Yeah.
words, there are,
So
yeah,
just to summarize it, so all men and so all Jewish men and women are. Can you hear that? There's a
yes,
Okay. All Jewish men and women are required to basically go into the military. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a combat role, but basically there are a lot of non-combat roles, which is actually one of the reasons why there are shortages, because there's a lot of people who prefer the non-combat roles and not enough people in the combat roles. So basically, all Jewish men and women, but also Druze men and Circassian men, or Circassian men, which Druze is a sort of like an offset. It's not really Muslim, but it's based on one of the Muslims' faith. And Circassians is one ethnic group from that used to be in Russia, but yeah, they were sort of expelled. Let's keep it at that. And as you said, all Arabs are also exempt, as well as a lot of Orthodox Jews, such as Haredi Jews.
right.
So
But there
the
are
reason,
such evidence, aren't there, of Arabs and these religious groups who do
yeah.
volunteer?
So there is a I think it's in a thousands a year where non-Jewish people volunteer, and there is like a regiment or a battalion set up specifically for those people. So since I don't have the notes in front of me, I don't remember, but there is a specific battalion set up that is for the Haredi Jews. So they have a lot of special. So they put them all in one group, basically. Uh, One of the reasons is so they can adhere to their religious principles and oh, sorry, still serve in the army.
Very interesting. There was news in October of thousands volunteering to serve in the Israeli military, and there have been stories since, even in this year, of volunteers because they have a conscripted military service. Other ways in which people who want to volunteer in the wake of October 7th to help Israel, they don't seem to be lacking in enough volunteers to do the job, or at least to do the job properly. If Israel were to focus less on
Well,
ground troops,
just quickly, let me now stop you there, because that was my first question that I would like pose to you, but of course I have my own answer. But basically, so there have been, as I mentioned at the start, there have been shortages for men, for basically manpower, and there have been several different ideas on how to fulfill that manpower. I think one of them was, which I think was coming from the Yoav Galant, the defense minister, that potential for drafting the Haredi Jews, so the Orthodox Jews who have an exemption, basically at least for some time get rid of it, which might not be easy to pass, since a lot of those Orthodox political powers or people who represent them are currently in the Netanyahu government. So that one doesn't really seem feasible. And I think there were even a couple talks about trying to conscript the Arab Israeli population. So my
well,
first
that
question for my first question for you would be, especially with the Israeli history, since this military draft has been in effect since the Declaration of Independence, uh, don't you think there is a case to have a military draft? Because I think earlier you talked about why Ayn Rand disagreed with it. Don't you think there is a case for a military draft for a nation that is basically almost constantly being threatened by different nations around it? Not
no,
just Hamas, but
no. If there are insufficient young people who are willing to fight for it, no matter what the context, then the nation itself has to question the validity of its existence. But I would respond in a couple of ways. If Israelis were confident about victory, I think that might be different. If they approached this in a more aggressive way, if people were more confident that Netanyahu would win this war. Now, let me suggest something else. How about paying them properly? I know that when you risk your life, it's money is all sort of a different category of consideration. On the other hand, these people should be paid appropriately. And finally, if they fought the war properly, they wouldn't be risking and needing so many soldiers. Israel doesn't need so much boots on the ground as they need technology. As we've said many times on this show, to risk a single Israeli soldier in order to protect the life of Palestinian civilians, that's an immoral way for Israel to approach the war. And frankly, that's got to be completely demoralizing. Would you volunteer for combat to go house to house in urban combat or tunnel to tunnel in tunnel combat if there was an alternative that could have spared your life? If the Israeli military strategy, I mean, if they want to use these guys like fodder, of course they need a draft. Of course they're going to have certain shortages. Why would you senselessly waste your life to save a Palestinian who's probably a terrorist sympathizer's life? That's an immoral way to go about it. They need fewer boots on the ground and more bombs from the sky. And yes, that would be more indiscriminate, if you will, about the Palestinian or the Gazan population, whatever you want to call them. But you wouldn't need so many soldiers on the ground. And more than that, it would encourage morale. You would tell the Israeli soldiers that the government has their back. If now, after 7 months of criminally wasting Israeli lives, there is a problem in recruitment, it's not terribly surprising to me. First of all, they don't need the number of people. Secondly, if they showed the value of the lives of Israeli soldiers, the morale would probably be higher and you'd have more volunteers. And finally, as I say, you could pay them properly. So I'd say all of those things. Israel has the technology to deal with this. And if technology can spare lives of your own people, use it in a just war. Use it in a just war. But as I say, when it was back in October, there was no lack of volunteers. Thousands of people were volunteering. Israel back then was saying, hey, we're getting so many volunteers, we don't know what to do with them. Is it surprising to you now that 7 months on, given the way Israel is fighting this, that they're having recruitment for at least the combat mission volunteers? I don't find that very surprising. Now, the moral question, if you don't have enough who qualify under your current draft law, the solution is not to draft everybody. Just make the rights violation even worse. What you're saying is that everyone is a slave to the state. It is a fundamental violation of rights, as Ayn Rand says, fundamental violation of the right to life. The state is, in effect, saying, we own you. We can make you die for our cause. You are our slave. Ayn Rand points out that in the United States, this is clearly an unconstitutional thing. It's a violation of the amendment that we passed that made slavery unconstitutional everywhere within the jurisdiction of the United States that happened after the Civil War, involuntary servitude. And it is the ultimate statist collectivist premise that you belong to everyone else and they can dispose of your life. They can make you fight in a cause that you may not even understand and die. Force you to die for a cause you don't even understand, much less volunteer for. So that is profoundly immoral. It is an assertion that everyone, it's as bad as any totalitarian premise of any communist or Nazi ever articulated. We own you. You are a slave to the group, to the collective, and we can dispose of your life as we choose. That is fundamentally immoral. And there's another point here about the morality of this and the morale and encouraging this. If there were not a draft, Israelis would be more intently aware of the need for volunteers. And so those who really cared would be more encouraged to sign up. If you're going to waste my life, if you're going to waste the resource, if you're going to make everyone do it, then well, everyone is doing it, and Israel can assign them. So I don't see the logic here. As I say, I was covering before, as you were gone for a while, the rate of Russian defection in Ukraine, and I think that tells you a great deal. Not only are Russians defecting to Ukraine, but a significant percentage of the Russian army that invaded Ukraine has simply disappeared off the radar map, and Russia has lost track of them. This is probably a bunch of soldiers defecting. In fact, Ayn Rand made a very similar comment. If there was ever a war with the West, she said half of the miserable Russians would probably defect. And we're seeing, I think, her prediction come true in Ukraine. But it's believing in the cause. And to believe in your country, to believe in your cause, makes you a better soldier, a better motivated soldier, someone who cares. By far the most effective force is a volunteer force. And if people know that there's a draft, they're likely to be more complacent about the matter. Moreover, if your country isn't fighting the war properly and you think that they're going to waste my life to protect Palestinian civilians, you might be a little discouraged from signing up. And that's exactly what Israel is doing. They're willing to kill their own soldiers in order to preserve the lives of so-called innocents in this, when we know the overwhelming number in the population supports Hamas. In any event, they're tools of Hamas. They voted for Hamas. They're part of the Hamas. They've been hiding hostages. So to the very idea of costing one IDF soldier to protect any civilians is immoral. It's total sacrifice in my view. And if that kind of value was placed on the life of Israeli soldiers, I think there'd be higher morale and more people willing to volunteer even for combat services. And the solution, with all due respect to the member of the Knesset you quoted, is not to draft everybody, turn the entire country into slaves. The solution is to have a better strategy and to be more principled about the freedom that Israelis are fighting for. If Israelis are fighting for, an ancient religion, that's just an immoral way to go about this. If they're fighting for rights and liberty, this is one area where we have to say Israel is an imperfect government. Not to say that the United States hasn't had a draft, other countries haven't had military conscriptions, but they're always immoral, even if it's the relatively free country versus the totalitarians. If you don't have enough people in your country to volunteer for the war, maybe that war should not be fought. And as I say, back in October, there were plenty of volunteers, more volunteers than they knew what to do with. It's hardly surprising to me now, 7 months later, that they're having trouble filling military combat positions, given the way they fight the war, given how long this has lasted. Like we say, this should have been wrapped up back in October. And it could have been done far more from the air. That Israel should use its superior technology to spare its own soldiers. And how would you feel if you were an Israeli soldier and they weren't doing that? They were putting the lives of people who cheer, jeer, spit on, join in the atrocities of October 7th. Now, those people's lives have to be spared at the expense of your life. You die. These Palestinians who celebrated October 7th, they don't. So that they don't. Well, I could think of nothing that would discourage morale more than that.
So hopefully I'm back to stay, although this has been one hell of an episode.
Yes, kind of a dramatic and epic thing we're enduring here. I hope the listeners were able to follow me through my sort of monologue there when you were gone.
So we have about 5 minutes to say, which should be enough for me to make one last point I wanted to say. And someone actually brought it up, so I'll just read a comment. He says, "It's not slavery to be forcefully drafted. It is a duty you have no right to deny if you are a worthy citizen of democracy." So something I would like to talk about, in a sense, I understand where he's coming from. If you live in a nation such as US or even if you live in Ukraine and you have to fight against Russia, or as I said, the US against the Nazis. There is a certain, I think, responsibility morally, I think you have towards the nation that you believe is the best nation, or the that you want to defend, that's yours. So I understand having this sort of like moral, again, I dislike the word duty, the moral responsibility even for a lot of Israelis to go and fight for the ADF, as many went back to Israel to fight. But there are 2 points then. One, the nation cannot force you to do that. You cannot force morality. You cannot make someone care who doesn't want to do that. And on the other hand, if I was someone, again, if I had this choice of like going back to Israel and joining the IDF, if I saw the way the current government is waging this war, I mean, what am I joining for? To protect the Palestinians, to make sure not a single of them died, to not actually protect my nation, but focus more on the protecting enemies and delivering aid to them and making sure not a single one gets harmed? No, if I'm joining, if I want to protect my nation, then I want the nation to actually protect me. I want them to go and actually achieve the military goal, in this case of destroying Hamas, or as it used to be, destroying the Nazis. If we had the similar tactic as we did, as the current government had in the World War II, I wouldn't say anyone has a moral responsibility to join. Even now, I think there is still some, but the way the current government is waging the war, it's hard to actually go to someone and say, why are you not fighting when the current government is waging this war like this?
Well, is there, I would ask the questioner, is there a moral duty to fight for Nazi Germany because you're a German? Is there a moral duty to fight for Russia and Ukraine because you're a Russian? No. Ayn Rand herself said, yes, if you live in a free society that has been unjustly attacked, it would be moral. In fact, you have a moral responsibility, just as you would any other kind of moral responsibility. The article I'm quoting is The Wreckage of the Consensus, which you can find in Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. She agrees with you, Daniel, that in defending a free society, one has a moral responsibility. But wait, even there, if that moral responsibility isn't widely understood, then you don't have a sufficient base to support the country in the first place. And even if it is a country like the United States, if there's a draft, then they can get away with doing all kinds of wars they shouldn't fight, like Vietnam. If you think about the Vietnam War, where tens of thousands of people died, and it was for what? A senseless war. This senseless military intervention can only be stopped with a volunteer service. Not only that, but it really should only be the ones who understand and care who fight the war. A volunteer army is obviously going to be better motivated and a better army. You're also going to, as I say, have run the risk of bad wars. And in any case, if you don't have a sufficient population that understands it, then I'm afraid your free country is doomed in any event. Doomed in any event. And like I say, if Israel had been fighting this war properly, it would have been wrapped up in October. They would have done it mostly from the air. And in the face of saying, no, you've got to die for the Palestinian population, a truly evil proposition, I have no responsibility to join in that sort of war effort. In fact, it is a form of slavery. Why am I fighting for the protection of my country? Why is it not a responsibility to fight for Nazi Germany, but a moral responsibility, not one that can legally be enforced? But why is it a moral responsibility even to fight for a relatively free country if I can be enslaved? If America didn't have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, a Bill of Rights, an opposition to slavery and involuntary servitude, there'd be no reason to fight for it.
Yeah. So, and with that, let me quickly thank the super chatters. So we have one new member, Kurkan. Thank you so much. We have a super sticker from Jonathan, a super sticker from Bonnie, And a super sticker from Jeff, thank you so much. And also a super chat from Christian, who says, Israel has no problems to find volunteers, but most soldiers are unhappy with the general command of the IDF. At least that's what I'm told. Nothing less than victory is demanded by any. And I think that's pretty much summarizes everything we said. So with that, we have the reality show coming up. It should go live in just a couple of minutes. Thank you, James, for carrying the episode today. Thank you, everyone, and bye-bye.
Bye.